Understanding early signs of autism and effective interventions. The content of this tutorial was originally developed by Shelton K. Gilliard and is narrated by Mary Reed. There are 4 objectives to this tutorial. They are to review the milestones of early development and the differences in children with autism spectrum disorders, to identify potential differences in early childhood development that serve as red flags for additional evaluation, to provide a brief summary of early childhood screening tools, and to illustrate the outcomes of the diagnostic and intervention process through sharing one child's experience. To meet diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder, a child must present with significant concerns in socialization, communication, and behavior. While it is not uncommon for many young children to demonstrate delays in one of these areas, children who are eventually identified with an autism spectrum disorder begin to experience them in all 3. A great way to learn more about the characteristics of autism spectrum disorders and the diagnostic process for evaluating it is to view Autism Spectrum Disorders, an overview. This tutorial can also be found on the CARD website. To fully understand early childhood development, we have to start with the development of the brain. 5 weeks after conception, cells within the embryo specialize to form a nervous system. These cells move and die as connections are formed until a network of 10 billion cells and 1 million billion connections are developed. In children with autism spectrum disorder, the neurological connections responsible for typical development have formed differently. Early brain development progresses from the rear forward, where higher-order thinking such as impulse control, reasoning, and language processing occurs. Recent studies have shown that many children with autism have an increase in brain volume, due at least in part to an overgrowth of white matter. To make a very simple analogy for this, think of an infant's brain as a computer, with the developing gray matter as the circuit boards and the white matter as the cords or connections between the circuit boards. If there are too many cords making connections in the computer, sometimes the information being processed will go where it's supposed to go, and at other times it might not, or it will go to a different board. These studies indicate the increase in growth of cerebral white matter is concentrated in areas of the brain that control what is known as executive functioning, or the ability to integrate and associate new information or experiences with previous ones. This leads to a problem with functional connectivity in language and cognitive development, or difficulty with coordinating these areas of the brain that need to be synchronized for higher order information processing and thought. Throughout this tutorial, you'll hear the term red flag used in our discussion of developmental milestones for young children. But what does this term mean? Well, the term red flag refers to things to be aware of at certain points in a child's development that could be a possible warning sign of a delay, or even an emerging indicator of an autism spectrum disorder. However, there are some important things to keep in mind with this term. Children develop skills in a predictable sequence according to their developmental level, but how those skills are demonstrated and the specific age at which they may emerge has considerable range. While we will be discussing child development in general and what you might expect a child to be capable of at a particular age, be sure to keep in mind that the presence or absence of a single red flag is not an indication of a problem in and of itself. It's the pattern or combination of these red flags that should be of concern, particularly if they are apparent at a significant point in time beyond what's typical for general child development. Atypical development of communication, social, and behavior skills can be clinically noted as early as 6 months. However, the youngest child diagnosed with autism is 9 to 11 months. A firm understanding of typical developmental milestones is critical to identifying children at risk for developing autism spectrum disorders. So now let's begin to discuss what you should expect to see at early points in a child's social, communication, and behavioral development, and what some of these early red flags that could be indications of areas of concern might be. As a starting reference point, let's take a look at a typically developing baby. The little boy in this clip is about 6 months of age.
Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Da, 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 da. Mama, mama, mama. Mama. Mama.
As you saw, a typically developing baby as young as 6 months of age is already learning and demonstrating the foundations of social and emotional expression. Generally, babies of this age can communicate pain, fear, or discomfort through their own facial expressions, body language, and cries. Recognize, respond to, and look for familiar voices or sounds. And focus on and reach for small objects such as crib mobiles or baby toys. At this point in the child's development, some red flags for concern could be if the baby has a flat affect. This means they don't respond to or offer up a social smile, or they don't respond to pleasant or unpleasant sounds and sensations like laughing when being tickled or crying at a loud sudden noise. They have little or no interest in the usual baby toys such as rattles, noise makers, stuffed animals, or other things that make engaging sounds and movements. They don't seem to recognize themselves or other familiar people like mom and dad when looking in a mirror. Early language and communication skills should begin to emerge around the time a baby is 6 months of age. Typically, babies begin to coo and make vocalizations at this point. You may hear them playing with sounds and experimenting with sound production and patterns. Most babies of this age love to be held, cuddled, and touched, which is the basis for the development of nonverbal expression and receptive communication skills. Some red flags that could be cause for concern in early communication development could be if the baby is not making a variety of sounds in different pitches and patterns, doesn't look in the direction of a parent's voice, or doesn't reach for interesting things or people such as toys, bottles, or parents when they are slightly out of reach. At 12 months of age, children are beginning to move from infancy to toddlerhood. They recognize that parents are their caregivers and often become upset when they are separated from them. They recognize themselves if held to a mirror or shown a picture. They enjoy the attention and reaction they receive from adults, such as excited praise or applause for things that they do. On the other hand, some red flags for concern at this developmental stage could be if the child is difficult to soothe or cries uncontrollably for extended periods of time, doesn't imitate adult actions or respond to attempts by adults to play, or if they make no attempt to imitate even simple adult actions or sounds. Also, by 12 months of age, a child's early communication skills should be emerging and expanding rapidly. Typically, a 1-year-old can follow simple one-step directions like wave bye-bye or don't touch, consistently uses one word other than mama or dada, such as uh-oh or ba-ba as a word for bottle. Appropriately uses gestures, such as pushing something that is unwanted away or reaching for an item that is dropped on the floor. Red flags that communication abilities aren't developing in a typical fashion include when the child avoids eye contact and doesn't seem to be aware that another person is attempting to talk with them, doesn't follow one-step directions like sit down, and only uses gestures to communicate without also pairing simple words or sounds with them. At about 1 year, babies typically begin to explore their world through play and close observation of things happening around them. It's not unusual to find that children of this age can play by themselves with toys or other small objects they can manipulate, enjoy opening and closing things like cabinet doors or pots and pans with lids, look at the person talking to him or her, and then often respond with their own facial expressions or reactions. In contrast to these typical signs of early play development, children who eventually are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder may begin to show differences in their behavior at this age. Some of these behavioral red flags could be if the child doesn't show an interest in common sorts of baby toys, or if they show an unusual interest in a particular object, such as the television remote or a pet's collar. Lacks reciprocal play skills. That is, if they don't respond or react to an adult's attempt to play a simple game with them. Appears to have an obsessive interest in repetitive actions such as opening and closing doors or turning the light switch on and off. Lacks or has only fleeting eye contact, especially with familiar adults. By 18 months, typically developing toddlers can do many new things, such as knowing the names of familiar people and body parts, engaging in simple pretend games such as feeding a doll or pushing a car, and becoming upset when separated from their mothers. At this age, some red flag warnings of possible developmental delays or autism spectrum disorders can be if the child engages in rigid, repetitive, or non-functional play with toys and objects, shows no reaction or signs of distress when the caregiver leaves the area, or does not play simple pretend games. Communication skills by the age of 18 months should be rapidly developing. Some signs that language and communication development are on course include when the child uses gestures and words to get needs met, such as when he or she points to a cup and says, "juice," has a vocabulary of approximately 5 to 20 words that are used consistently, and follows two-step directions like "come here" and "sit down." Indicators of possible autism spectrum disorders in language development areas may be evident if the child does not use words, sounds, and/or gestures to get needs met, has difficulty following 1 to 2-step directions, and does not have a spoken vocabulary of at least 5 words. Around the time a toddler is 1.5 years old, they typically begin to show early signs of emerging self-care abilities. These will be noticed most prominently with feeding and dressing skills. For instance, typical children of 18 months begin to feed themselves with their fingers and also by grasping a spoon and placing it to their mouth. Children of this age show a great deal of variability when it comes to the amount and types of foods they will eat. Many toddlers can be described as picky eaters. Quite often, children will learn how to express their preferences through situations involving new food, with a great range of tastes, textures, and smells. It's also about this time that children are typically able to remove or at least assist with taking off a piece of clothing like a sock or a diaper. In the case of children who become identified with autism spectrum disorders, other red flags in these emerging self-care skill areas may become apparent. Things to take notice of at this age are if the child shows extreme resistance to different types of food and will only eat a few specific ones.
becomes agitated if repetitious behaviors like lining toys or crayons are interrupted, does not exhibit or show an interest in beginning dressing and feeding activities. Anyone who's ever had the experience of dealing with a 2-year-old for much time clearly understands that children of this age are beginning to enter a new stage of their growth and development. For instance, typically developing 2-year-olds are able to engage in pretend play and games that have more than one action or step to them. 2-year-olds also begin to recognize that they have the ability to influence what happens around them. They learn to use the word no as a way of resisting changes in activities or demands that they would prefer to avoid. Through this, they begin to gain a sense of identity as their own unique person. On the other hand, some developmental red flags at this age would be if the child shies away from peers and unfamiliar people or seems unaware of them, plays with toys or familiar objects in a rigid, non-functional, or repetitious manner, or has trouble relating to others and that he or she seems aware or interested in their activities but doesn't interact directly. By the age of 2 or 24 months, the language development of most children is well underway. Most 2-year-olds can create and use sentences of at least 2 or more words. They start using pronouns including me, you, and mine, and they learn how to ask why as a reflection of their growing reasoning abilities and conceptual thinking. Delays in communication skills at this age should be fairly obvious. Indications of this are evident if the child relies heavily on gestures, leading, or other motoric means of communication, or if they exhibit very little spontaneous speech, relying mainly on repetitive, prompted phrases and dialogues. Turning 2 is a time when children typically learn to exert both greater personal independence and control over their immediate environment. It's not unusual for them to be able to put on and take off clothing, resist adult directions or assistance, give out their own orders and react strongly to adult interference. Contrary to this, children who are at risk for developmental delays and autism spectrum disorders often make no attempt to assist in the dressing process. They also often lack initiation for interactions and play with peers and adults. By the time a child is 36 months of age or 3 years old, they're typically learning and growing at an amazing rate. They begin to play side by side with other children and to exhibit a great deal of imaginative play with toys. They notice and react to changes in routine and appear to be interested in gender differences between boys and girls. You probably won't notice these things going on, at least to the same degree, with children who are diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. Instead, some of the red flags that you may notice at this age include a lack of functional play skills, as well as a lack of interest in peers. It's also not uncommon for children with autism spectrum disorders to begin experiencing a great deal of difficulty with changes in routine or transitions between activities, especially if they are sudden or hurried. 3-year-olds are typically well on their way with language development. Many children this age have a vocabulary of at least 50 words that they use appropriately and on a regular basis. They can construct sentences of 3 to 5 words, and they can talk about their interests and their feelings in both the past and the future. In contrast to this, children who by this age are exhibiting other signs of autism spectrum disorders will also demonstrate delays or differences in their language development. You may notice that often their language, when it is present, is used primarily to express wants or needs, and it may be restricted to the child's interests. Often their language lacks emotional intent. That is, they do not use it to express their feelings or to respond to the feelings of others. They may also experience difficulty following spoken directions. Most 3-year-olds are also gaining further independence in their self-care and cognitive abilities. Usually, a 3-year-old child is able to feed themselves and drink from a cup or a glass without help. They are able to sustain the focus of their attention for increasing lengths of time and can imitate the activities and movements of peers and adults. Children who only engage in a few, if any, independent self-help skills, or who seem very passive or disinterested in participating in them, may be at a higher risk for developing autism spectrum disorder. Also be aware of those 3-year-olds who are not actively imitating the things they see other children and adults doing. So how do you know if a child is displaying enough red flags to warrant a more extensive formal diagnostic evaluation? In general, it's a good idea to consider referring children over the age of 3 who are demonstrating a consistent pattern of behaviors, including combinations of the following. Inappropriate gaze. That is, those children who do not make or avoid eye contact, or those who look at movement or objects with their peripheral vision rather than straight on. A lack of sharing enjoyment or interests. Those children who do not seem interested in joining the activities of others, or who only seem interested in repetitive activities they engage in by themselves. Little or no response to their name when it's called. Lack of coordinated facial expression, gesture, and sound. A lack of showing, either by bringing an object to another person's attention or by directing their attention to the object. Unusual intonation and/or pitch of voice. Does the child make peculiar, repetitive noises or have an odd quality to the tone of their voice? Repetitive movements or posturing of body, arms, hands, or fingers, and repetitive movements with objects. Children who are socially isolated, do not respond to their name, and present with significant repetitive behaviors at 36 months are at risk for developing an autism spectrum disorder and should have a full assessment completed. Now, let's watch a quick video clip of Jamal. How many of these red flags do you observe in it?
Jamal, do you want to come play? Come on, Jamal. Come on to play. Let's do it.
And finally, you should refer a child for a diagnostic evaluation immediately whenever the following red flags are present. If the child is not babbling, pointing, or using other gestures to communicate by 12 months. If the child is not using single words by 16 months. If the child has no 2-word spontaneous phrases by 24 months. Or if any loss of any language or social skills appears at any age. Why is early screening for developmental delays or autism spectrum disorder so important? One of the most compelling reasons is that children who receive an early diagnosis and begin intervention at a young age have a much better prognosis for their future. Current research in early intervention indicates that intensive early intervention before the age of 3 results in greater impact after age 5. Specifically, the brains of young children are still growing and expanding at a rapid rate. Because of this, intervention during those critical years is most effective at addressing delays as they develop and preventing them from intensifying. There's also documented evidence that children who receive early intervention services have better school placement outcomes, and they also have a better chance of graduating from high school. As they move into adulthood, there is a higher likelihood that they will live independently. The cost of these early intervention services has a significant positive economic impact over a lifetime. One simple screening tool that is of great use for identifying young children in need of a more formal diagnostic evaluation is the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers, otherwise referred to as the MCHAT. The MChat relies on information gathered from parents. It consists of 23 yes-no questions and is designed to be scored by the individual who is completing it. It takes 10 to 15 minutes to complete and can be a very good starting point for identifying developmental problems in young children. If you would like to know more about the MChat, you might want to view the card tutorial, Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers, MChat. Contact us to request a copy of this tutorial. In addition to the MChat, there are other screening tools that can be helpful for identifying children in need of a more formal diagnostic evaluation. These include the Checklist for Autism in Toddlers, or the CHAT, and the Pervasive Developmental Disorder Screening Test, or the PDD-ST. Having said that, let's meet a young man named Diego who received a diagnosis of autism at the age of 20 months. At the time of Diego's diagnosis, he had no communication, significant behavior concerns, and impaired social and play skills, such that he could not tolerate a preschool placement. Diego's progress is an example of the benefits of early screening, diagnosis, and intervention.
First, then Play-Doh. Good job of putting. Here, you want to help me? You put it away. Here, put it in the bag. You put it in the bag. In here. No, in here. In the bag. Put it away like this. Like this. There we go. Good job. Oh, thank you. Can you get the other pieces?
A simple picture exchange system with vocabulary that was most relevant to Diego's communicative needs and interests was created for him.
You want to flip it through it? That's his page.
He always has.
You can kind of flip through. Okay, go ahead. I'm just going to kind of zoom in. Okay. These are videos. Teletubbies.
As Diego learned that using his picture exchange board was an effective, easy means of communication, he also started generalizing his new skills in different ways at home. He soon understood he did not need to rely on problem behavior to get his communication needs met. As a result, behavior concerns decreased as communication skills increased.
More helicopters.
See if he does it the next time. Try not to tap the board. See if he gets it.
What happened? It flew? It went up in the air? You want me to kiss your thumb? Okay. More helicopters. Helicopter. Wow, did you see that? It flew.
As Diego grew and became more competent and comfortable communicating with his picture exchange system, his skills were generalized into other situations and settings outside his home. Here's a clip of him using his communication support in one of his favorite places.
What did I tell you? That's really good.
I said Bill can't be It's just.
So you can see that anything is possible when a child receives a thorough diagnostic evaluation and is provided the appropriate supports and interventions. Here's proof. This clip is of Diego now using age-appropriate communication skills and playing cards with his mom.
I have 4
No, go fish.
logo pins. Oh,
You won.
I have it together.
Is it my turn? Does Diego have a 5?
Nope. Go pin.
Your turn.
Let me have a 2.
Yes, I do.
I got it.
You got it. You did. You get to go again.
Wow.
Yep, door's on the flower. Is it your turn?
Nope. Mine is 2.
It's my turn?
No.
Are you sure?
No.
Okay. Do you have a 3?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, good. I get to go again?
No.
Do you have a 6?
Nope. Go pin.
Oh, your turn.
Let me have a 4. Hey.
Well, thank you. Oh, are you sharing matches with me?
No.
Okay.
Have a knot.
You do have a lot.
Mommy has a knot too.
Mommy has a lot too. That's right.
Both have a wolf.
Both of us have the most? No, only one person can have the most. Who do you think has the most?
A wolf.
You think Diego has the most? Why? Because you won?
The following resources will provide additional information pertaining to child development issues and early signs of autism spectrum disorder. Making decisions about intervention options should be a thoughtful and deliberate process that is based on a thorough understanding of the intervention itself and reflection of its potential impact on your child and family. If you still have questions or feel you would like additional information or support, please feel free to contact the Card Center in your area.